Welcome, everyone, to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Welcome,
Hey,
Julie.
Pete, thanks so much. And we are
Yep.
both joined today by a mutual friend, Boyd Davis, who's the CEO and co-founder of Payfederate. Boyd, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Well, good to have. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Listen, we'd love to have you start out just by giving a little bit of background and tell folks who you are. Then we'll introduce the topic later, and then we'll after you introduce yourself, we'll pump you with a couple of our typical questions for our guests.
Well, sure. So I'm a long time, too many decades tech guy. Started out my career in hard tech at Intel. I was at Intel for a couple of decades. Very disappointed and sad to see what's happened to that great company. And then when I left there, I went into the startup world and kind of slowly started moving up the stack. I was working on a bunch of data technologies and was in the earlier stages of AI and machine learning application development, and then all in the startup world, and then finally moved into application space, which is where I got my deep indoctrination into compensation. So I'm on my second compensation startup. We sold the first one to a large ERP vendor. And started our latest one now almost 2 years ago. So
Wow, time flies.
I think of myself as a reformed big company guy. Spent time at Intel and Accenture, both great companies, great people, but spent most of the last decade or so in the early stage startup world.
Yeah. That's the excitement. That's where the fun is.
Yeah, every end of the spectrum, right? Well, listen, as you mentioned, you found your way into compensation, but we'd love to know, and we ask all of our guests, how you got into HR compensation space.
Yeah.
And then from there, more interestingly, why on earth do you stay?
So I have to say that my entrance into compensation was borderline accidental. So, I knew that I'm a big believer in technology. That's where I've spent my career. And as I worked through, the decades of my career, I realized all the value is in application software. Really, everything else is just a means to an end. And so, after I had left Accenture, I was introduced to a real compensation technology expert, my co-founder, Barkat Ali. And he had started a compensation planning, or so the process of managing the merit cycle. That was our first company together, and I got into it deep. Although the fascinating thing about my entry into compensation was I drew enormously on my experiences from Intel, because that's where I was a new college graduate, first level manager, mid-level manager, and ultimately an executive running a business unit. And I saw that whole journey of how compensation affected talent from that perspective. And I'll have to say, kudos to the Intel compensation team from the 90s, if I date myself a little bit. They had adopted some very advanced thinking around transparency and making sure that people understood how compensation related to performance and contributions and potential. And I've carried a lot of those lessons through, because surprisingly, there are relatively few organizations that I deal with now that are as sophisticated as Intel was back in the day in this area. But I always feel like I bring a business leadership perspective to comp, because to me, it was, I was the one complaining about, oh, you're not paying my people enough. And and now looking at it from the other side, I always say I was one of those jerk executives who thought they knew how compensation worked. But I feel like I'm the fox in the hen house of helping the compensation community know how to communicate with leadership. So I feel like I sit on both sides, although now I'm firmly a hardcore comp guy after doing it for so many years.
Hey, by the way, shout out to your partner in crime, Barkat Ali. I've had a chance to get to know him well over the last many months. And we are nothing without our partners in crime, as you know, from Pete and I's pairing here.
No crime.
Absolutely. And Barkat is one of those crazy guys who knows deeply compensation, but he is equally deep in software architecture.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really one of the sources of our differentiation, I think, is, we have a number of competitors, lots of people play in this space, and some of them are very, very deep in comp. and some of them are very, very deep in tech.
Huh.
Very, very few of them are
Oh,
equally adept at
yeah.
both. And I think that's given us an ability to deliver an insightful thing. But we're not here to talk about my
No.
product. But yeah, Barcat is very, very special.
Hey, so I think we've given folks a little bit of a hint of what our topic's going to be for today. And
Yep.
we're
Now you're doing some research on it,
yeah,
right?
that's right. So we wanted to
Yeah.
talk with you, Boyd, about the changing landscape of compensation, which is near and dear to your heart. And especially in today's landscape, employers seem to need to share more details about their compensation philosophy and structure than ever before in history, right? And I know you have some thoughts about why that is.
Yeah, so the biggest change in compensation is definitely the shift toward transparency.
Yeah.
Yep.
And transparency is a loaded word. In some senses, you have a number of laws being passed. I think we're up to 22 states in the United
Hmm.
States, significant parts of the European Union and the UK and Canada, and maybe a little bit less so in Asia and Latin America. There are laws being passed to say you have to publish the estimated range for a given job when you post it, and you have to tell an employee who's in a job what's the range for their job. And the purpose of it, of course, is to make it easier for traditionally underrepresented groups, in particularly, the gender gap where women are perceived to maybe not be as aggressive in negotiating pay, and therefore making it more transparent, will close that gender wage gap. And that's a whole topic for another whole podcast, to talk about the motivation for the laws and whether they'll work and whether
Oh
the
yeah.
premise itself is true. I have some reservations about it, but the reality is that the laws are pushing in one direction, and you may like the laws or dislike the laws. They're happening. To me, the bigger thing, and I have young adult children,
Mhm.
um,
Same.
is the generational shift. They expect to they're much more willing to share details about their pay with one another, and they have a much higher expectation of understanding pay. So I think this shift is not just a legal shift; it's also a generational shift, and I think it's welcome. I look at it like the stock market, right? The labor market is a market, and markets perform better when there's transparency between buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
So I look at this as a very great thing, so that more people can get paid what they're worth. And by the
Yeah.
way, unfortunately for some employees or job seekers, what you're worth may not be what you'd like to make.
That's right.
So it cuts both ways, right? People
Yeah.
should get paid for the value that they contribute, and
Yeah.
but it's radically changing compensation in a
Y-
number of different ways that have nothing to do with the laws or compliance. It has to do with, how do you construct your pay strategy, how do you monitor it and communicate it, and I think those implications are quite significant, and represent a challenge, particularly for those organizations outside of, the largest organizations in the world. If you have fewer than 10,000 employees, the challenge is much, much greater than if you're my former employers, Intel and Accenture. They have massive teams to go kind of manage this, but you get down to, even a 200 person shop, they probably don't have any compensation professionals on their team, and yet they're going to have to publish pay ranges and be able to explain them. So
Yeah.
that's the change, is the breadth of how many people need to be prepared to communicate what they're going to pay for a job that they post.
Yeah. And that you mentioned the transparency being, the definition of that. There's probably a different lens for every generation as to what they expect, right? Or what they're willing to tolerate in that regard.
Yeah, I hear two objections to it, and both of
Yeah.
them are kind of valid. One is they immediately think of transparency being like a government organization, right?
Yeah.
Like universities, they publish
Yeah.
everybody's absolute pay in a
Yeah.
website, and you can go
Military.
look, right?
Yeah. The military, right?
Yeah, and very, very, very few people believe that that's the right path for the private sector. And the other one is just kind of a knee jerk. Government shouldn't tell me what to do. If
Hmm.
if I'm going to underpay somebody, and they are willing to
Yeah.
take it, then I should be able to go do that. I get a little bit of that, and I understand that mindset. But again, I kind of liken it back as who would want the public stock markets to be operate the same way, where some people got to buy stock at a different price. And, I think
Yeah,
markets
yeah,
perform better when the buyers and sellers have clearer understanding of one another, and I think it's a fair role for governments to make that happen, because it's not like saying you have to pay somebody something. Nobody's saying, okay, at least in this context for transparency, that you must pay people the same amount. It's not even that. It's just that you have to be able to say, when an employee comes and says, okay, what are you offering for this job?
yeah,
The seller ought to say what it
Yeah.
costs.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
Hey, spoiler alert. I know, P, we've talked a
yeah.
few times about this mini poll or mini survey we have on
Hmm.
compensation out.
Yeah,
One of the questions there is specifically asking practitioners, what does transparency mean to you, and what level of transparency exists in your organization? Is it, anything from none to, we just communicate our methodology and kind of, maybe where we expect to fit in the range, of salaries, or all the way down to, military style, open
it's on the
info. It's
it's
all
all
out there,
open book. Yeah,
So it won't be too long here before we get some results and see what folks say about that, and it'll
yeah,
be fun to share once we get that back here in a couple of weeks.
Well, and it's interesting. I've seen a lot of people like try to talk themselves into to not really embracing the idea, and okay, well, I'll just tell an employee what the range is for their job. But it's like a thread of a knit sweater. You start pulling on it, like, yeah,
yeah,
but what about when you post the job for that person's manager online? Eventually people will be able to piece together the entire set of ranges for a company if they're out recruiting and they're
yeah.
sharing individual ranges at a time. And it's like, I always tell clients that I work with, you know, um, the story's going to get out. Would you rather be the storyteller or
Great
have your
point.
employees fill in the gaps on their own?
Yeah.
Withholding information from employees sounds good, but I can guarantee you the stories that employees weave in their own minds is much more damaging and negative than
Oh yeah.
even maybe a not ideal story that you have to go tell.
Yeah, and you could see some of that playing out on Reddit and Glassdoor and
Mhm.
other places where you're absolutely right. They're controlling the narrative.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah,
so Boyd, when you and I met, it was thanks to a mutual friend of all of ours, actually, Steve Goldberg, and we had
the
the
legendary Steve
legendary,
Goldberg.
some of our earliest conversations. You really, you really sparked my interest by talking about paradigm shifts that are happening as
Yeah,
all of this happens legislatively, generation, mindset shift. And I know you have a few poignant ones, that you like to talk about. And I wanted to see if we could run through a couple of them here together.
I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
I love a good paradigm shift.
I kind of base this, and you're right. It's been thinking in mind for a long time. That's built a lot of what we're trying to do in the marketplace. But I think it's true for everybody that's in the compensation practitioner domain, that this shift toward transparency drives three major changes. One is what used to be discretionary, or kind of when I get around to it, becomes urgent. The second is that what used to be periodic, like I talked to a client yesterday that does market studies every 2 years.
Mhm.
What that is now shifting to more continuous. And I'm not saying you look at it every week or anything, but and then the third one is that to a large extent, uh, the information around compensation structures, job architectures, leveling frameworks, all the things that we as comp professionals, and for many of your audience who aren't comp
Yeah,
people, I try to avoid too much comp jargon, but a lot of the nuts and bolts of what exists ultimately leading to a salary range table. So for this job, you have this range. That's all been quite isolated, oftentimes residing in spreadsheets, maybe in some database inside a HRIS system. But now more and more that's going to be connected.
yeah,
And give me a good example. When you go open up a requisition in your ATS, maybe that's part of your HRIS platform, maybe not, but you go in there. Well, now all of a sudden, when you open up that job, you need to know what range to associate with it. So you're now using the ranges on an everyday basis. If you publish an employee total reward statement around focal time, you need to make sure that you're probably better off sharing what the range is. Because again, if somebody is at the 20th percentile of their range, and you don't tell them and explain why, hey, you're in great shape. You're at the bottom of your range, which means you have enormous headroom, right? Or somebody maybe at the top of the range, they feel really good about it, but you say, look, you're going to really want to move up and develop new skills, or you're going to kind of hit that ceiling.
Yeah.
It's about how do you use your philosophy and your strategy in everyday business. So I think all three of those, discretionary to urgent, periodic to continuous, and isolated to connected, is the roadmap for organizations that are really trying to evaluate what they do around pay.
Yeah.
Are you
He-
hearing my dogs
He's
barking?
fired up.
Yeah.
He's fired up. It's okay. It's
Definitely
okay.
fired
It's okay.
up.
I have two. They're always on the show. It's totally fine. Life happens.
Like
Life
we
happens.
had somebody at the door, and I put a sign on saying "Come in,"
That's
because I was on a call. But I realized the
I love
people
it.
that are coming to my home actually don't speak or read English, so I
Great.
I, I probably would have been better off
It's
communicating with
okay.
them.
It's okay.
And
It's okay. No,
so I
no,
don't
it's
know. Go
good.
back to
We're dog friendly here. We're everyone friendly. We are anyone and everyone friendly. Welcome at the HR and Payroll
yeah,
2.0.
yeah. This isn't the polished NBC News or something, right? This
Nah,
is
man.
three
This is
three HR
this
people
is
talking.
authentic.
this isn't fake news. This is authenticity right here. We
Absolutely.
are 100%
Actually,
authentic, and we
did you
always
see
will
both
be.
of us looked around like, oh, is that my dog?
That was my yeah, right. My Frenchie, he's going off. Yeah,
Luckily, I have two. You only heard one. But in any
yeah,
any
yeah,
case, I think
yeah,
I think thinking about that framework of how do you
yeah,
go from being able to respond, and I mean that might be the most confusing one of the three. I think people get periodic going to more continuous and isolated, to more connected. When I say discretionary to urgent, it's if you think about it, you might have somebody when you look at your pay and you kind of gauge it relative to market. You might have a population of people who are, say, they're dramatically underpaid.
Mhm.
It's just a reality that not all organizations can pay exactly consistent with their strategy in a given
Yeah,
cycle, right? The budget realities hit. You have to pick and choose. In the old days, you could wait a lot longer, right? You could say, okay, this segment of our population is not being paid exactly right, but we're okay with it right now. Let's invest elsewhere, and we'll fix it over time. It becomes more urgent when those people in those jobs are seeing job postings from talent competitors that make them know much more quickly that they're underpaid. So, and that will put a lot of pressure.
yeah,
And one of the things I always say around compensation is, you just, for the comp professionals that we work with, for most HR professionals that are probably your listeners, they can't change the budget, right?
right.
So
Yeah,
what you have to do is figure out with the budget you have, how do you best use it, and communicate why you're doing it.
Yeah.
right.
But I even believe that if an organization is not prepared to pay somebody, if say somebody's a little bit below market, there's a way you can explain like, hey, we're a little bit behind, but here's what we're going to do over the next several cycles to catch you back up, and here's all the other cool reasons to work for us.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
the worst thing you can do is stick your head in the sand and hope that your employees don't figure it out, because that's just not
Yeah.
that's not
yeah.
realistic.
And sometimes it's not just about the comp, right? It's the total comp, the total rewards, and all the things that come with it as
Sure.
well, right? Some companies can offer things that are intangible, or excuse me, tangible, that are not able to be offered at other companies. Like for example, when I worked at the Walt Disney Company, I didn't think that they paid the best, but they had some perks that you couldn't get anywhere else, right? So a lot of people stuck around for those things and the culture and other things. So,
Look, I
yeah,
think all the data suggests that compensation is just one of many leading reasons, right? The
yeah,
big reasons you always hear is compensation's one, relationship with the manager is two, and these are not in order. They're always in any survey. You'll find that the
oh yeah,
the second big bucket is their
Manager.
personal relationship
Mhm.
with their direct manager, and the third one is their perceived opportunity for growth.
yeah,
And organizations need to think about all three. I always view it that the absolute level of compensation. Look, I'm in a software business, and you know, I dare anybody to try to compete with Google and Microsoft for how you pay software developers. Right?
yeah,
It's not a game you want to get into. Those
yeah,
companies pay extremely, extremely well. Um, but what you can do is know where relative to the market you want to be, And then why beyond that would somebody want to work for you? The
Yeah.
thing that I believe is more fundamental than the level of pay is you can package the value proposition for an employer in a lot of different ways. The thing I think is way more important is trust.
Yes.
Trust that you're being fair. Trust that your pay policies aren't arbitrary or driven by favoritism. The lack of trust from employees because of the way they're paid would trump any amount of benefits or
Yes.
culture or mission, all those other cool things. So I actually think that's my mission is to make sure that people understand why they're being paid what they're being paid and know that it's not arbitrary, it's not based on favoritism, it's not certainly bias.
Yeah.
I'm a huge guy on equitable pay, and that doesn't mean
Yeah.
everybody gets paid the same. I think most bias is unintentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because
I mean,
people don't have the right tools.
so much of the employee experience and the pay experience is built on trust. And you're right. If that's not there, it's not really going to matter what you're paying
Yeah.
them.
I think internal to the organization too. So comp has always been its own thing, right? You mentioned comp jargon, and there's a whole it's a whole practice and a whole profession on its own. And
Yes. It's a
it's a
science.
thing, right? It's a big
It
hairy
is.
thing.
Art and
And it,
science. Art
and
and
an
That
art,
science.
people
yeah,
Art
love
and
or
science.
they shy away from, just like payroll. But I
yeah,
think the transparency, one of the things that I see the most happen organizationally to companies or folks that are looking across their HR staff is the impact it has on recruiting and the pay that you offer your new candidates, especially as we come out of a tight labor market, right? And the war on talent, has been around for a little while. And how you have to now look at what you're paying your new recruits and your new hires, and how that compares to folks who have been loyal and stable employees for a while. And that feels like that's one of the bigger ahas or the bigger fears or the bigger opportunities for employers to start to look not just at surveys and compensation ranges and tools, but what are you doing to recruit new folks and how does that compare to the compensation levels of your existing organization?
absolutely. And how back to the trust issue. Like, can you imagine you're in the trenches with an organization for 7, 8 years, and all of a sudden, um, they hire somebody who job hopped from a competitor that has less experience, but and they make more than you, and it's like for the last several years, this person's been helping our competitor. I've been building our business, and because the labor market is hot, you're going to go give them more. And by the way, the labor market is not as hot as
That's
it
right.
was, but
It's cooling.
there's still a lot of quits out there.
Yep.
I think the numbers from the labor department in July were like 3.3 million quits. And that's down from like 3.8. So yes, that's softer, and we've had hundreds of thousands of layoffs and all that, but good talent is still difficult to get and keep. So yeah, I think that is one of the big trends is people need to buy into the comp strategy and have it not be just the job of that one comp analyst.
Yeah.
People need to embrace it. It's the historical role for those of us who've been in comp. Is the fight is between the hiring managers and the recruiters who are incentivized in the case of the hiring manager to create the output they need, in the case of the recruiter to close the rack. Um, the comp person's always the bad
Yeah.
guy, saying you can't do this, and there's always kind of a fight. And I think the point is we got to give everybody the data to say, what might be penny wise to get that one rec closed might be pound foolish if the whole organization
Yeah.
Yeah.
starts to suffer. But everybody needs to be committed to
Yeah.
both a consistent, competitive, and equitable comp framework, but also recruiting and retaining the best talent.
Yeah, and so that transparency has to happen internally in organizations first, right? Especially where they're larger than just,
Yeah.
one jack of all trades, has to handle pretty much everything because you're a smaller organization. So comp needs to demystify what's going on over there so that recruiting can, march to the right drum. And, even managers who are working with existing talent and need to be concerned about their growth and their development and retaining them, and making sure that they understand and get that message of trust and transparency. Sometimes they don't have the visibility they need either, and so it's transparency for all. Right? It's where we're headed. It's got to go all over the
Yeah.
place.
It's interesting. One of the things I would also say about this new environment is that compensation is extraordinarily complex. How do you identify what jobs to benchmark against your jobs, right? That's an art and a science. How do you know, how often to update it and what happens when new survey data comes out and all that. One of the things I would say is at our organization, we've become increasingly focused on encouraging people to think about compensation the way you think about your car, right? Most people that own a car, you're going to go fill it up with gas. You're going to go change the oil when it needs to be changed, get the windshield wiper fluids, right? Everybody does that on their own. But when there's a significant challenge with their car, few people anymore can do what they used to do in the old days of put it in the garage and start tinkering around with it because you need supercomputers to talk to cars. So I
Yeah.
think comp's the same way. I think increasingly most organizations, particularly in those with anywhere from a few dozen to a few thousand employees, would be better off finding some compensation experts externally to help them do the heavy lifting of crafting a structure, updating the ranges, but then have used the internal expertise around comp to manage the comp cycle and really tailor it to individual employees. So
Yeah.
I see that bifurcation happening in a big way, and I think we're going to see massive growth in the compensation consulting arena as more people need to go and get their, either you can use the analogy of a car, go to your mechanic,
Yeah.
or maybe in a medical analogy would be most organizations can hire their own primary care physician for compensation. But when it gets to be a little bit more complex, you got to go outside and find a specialist.
Yeah.
So I'll throw a huge shout out to Julie's organization.
Yes.
Is one of the ones that I think is leading this charge to make some of these services that have to be personalized and tailored. So I really believe we're probably going to get me next to what do I recommend people do, but that'll be one of my recommendations. Is for
Can
most organizations, find
I
your
actually
specialist and then make sure that you have tools that allow you to work with it, and that'll help you handle all three of those paradigm shifts.
that brings up a good point. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Boyd, was what happens, right? We're already at about what, like 30 to 40+% gig economy, right? Gig workers now. We're clearly heading well over 50% in the coming years. And some say we might even get to more of a balance of where most of workers are gig, right? Which then means that a lot of us then are solopreneurs. And that then means that we're really going to be setting, I mean, as we are now in some ways, setting compensation based on what skills are worth in that moment. What happens to compensation at that point? Is that where those consultants are going to come into play? Because I would imagine it's going to get really, really real time, very real time, that you're going to have to know what this skill is worth to be able to compete for the right people at the right moment at the, in the flow.
That's a great question, Pete. And maybe I'm a bit of a contrarian on this.
Yeah.
I think there is some level of people looking at the early points of a curve and extrapolating it out to an end point, right?
Hmm.
The death of the job is, I think, McKinsey highlighted this a couple of years ago that
Yeah.
the job was going to go away, and everything was going to migrate to skills. I'm a massive believer in skills. Most organizations are woefully behind
Hmm.
in associating the skills they have with the output they need, right? We're still
Yeah.
too heavily as a society based on credentialing and signaling and things that don't relate to an actual output. Having said that, I'm not a big believer that I think the path we'll go down is to have jobs defined more and more around baskets of skills,
Mm.
as opposed to the idea of skills replacing it. Because
Yeah.
there's so many challenges we have yet to achieve. There's not a universal taxonomy of skills. Even if there was a universal
Yeah.
taxonomy
There's
of
multiple.
skills, there's no assessment for what those skills represent.
Yeah.
In an actual practice, the job of a recruiter in the modern day is to identify the skills you need and then talk to the candidate to get examples of where they've demonstrated that skill. It's not a binary thing, oh, you have a soft skill of communication, oh, you have a hard skill of Python. You know, it's not a checkoff, right? There's no systemic way to view it. It's
Hmm.
much more individualized to say, okay, you've listed this skill, explain to me how you demonstrated this skill. So I'm a huge, massive believer
Yeah.
in skills, but I think people that are leaping to a fundamental shift in how everything is done, maybe putting the cart a little ahead of the horse.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the better thing is to make sure your job descriptions and your job catalog are heavily based on skills. It's not a job that says here's a responsibility and skills are a bachelor's degree and 6 years of experience. That's
Yeah.
a bad job description,
Yeah.
right? Um, Fix those,
Yeah.
and the jobs framework and the benchmarking framework that exists will get us for several more years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I skipped your question on the gig economy just because
Yeah.
honestly, I haven't thought about it enough.
Yeah.
An individual gig economy, right? There's a lot of the gig economy that is firm to firm, right? So,
True.
for
True.
example, right,
B to B.
if an organization wants to get some compensation help, they're probably not going to go find a compensation consultant on Upwork or something, right? You
Hmm.
could,
Hmm.
no offense to anybody that
Yeah.
goes
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
that path. It's more likely you're going to call Julie's organization
Oh, right.
and
Right. Right.
so
I just mean,
the compensation thing. Now
yeah.
Julie will make sure she's got a good comp strategy, so she's got the right
No, no,
talent.
no. Totally
So
right. I'm just,
I think the breakdown of
yeah.
organizations into outsourcing, that I think will be,
Yeah.
quite dominant. But I'm not sure if we're going to get to everybody's, a 1099 contractor and
Yeah.
everybody works for themselves. I think that's unlikely to.
Yeah. There's some very lofty predictions about how many workers will be solopreneur types. And I'm just curious what
Yeah.
that's going to do to
Yeah.
these, but yeah, no, I agree. I wouldn't say go get a one-off. Yeah.
Yeah, firm to firm.
go to the consultants, but not specifically for comp, but I just mean in general, if we start
I was using
flooding,
that as an example
yeah,
that's close to my
Yeah.
heart, but
if we
in
flood the market
anything,
though,
I'm the CEO of a company,
yeah,
and I outsource marketing, I outsource finance,
yeah, yeah,
I outsource a chunk of engineering. Um, Most of it is firm to
Yeah.
firm.
yeah. That's a
You
great
know,
point. That's a great
and I
point.
think most organizations should think that way. I
Yeah,
guess I like to promote the idea of compensation consultants because I think a lot of our target market, the customers that I talk to, they don't necessarily think that way. They think they should be able to do it on their own, hire an HR generalist and have them take a couple of World at Work classes. That's a bad
Yeah.
path.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
you can do that for the application of comp, which is like driving your car, right? You can get people to do that, but when it comes to
yeah,
building the car or fixing the car,
Yeah, maybe
yeah,
not so much.
yeah,
call Julie or
Whoever.
the the hundreds of other Julies out there that have those
Yeah.
skills.
agreed,
Um,
agreed,
so
Hey,
agreed. It's gonna
I'm
be
it's funny.
interesting.
I think some software executives like, oh, our goal of our software is to replace consultants, and I just think that's
yeah.
silly.
Yeah,
The goal of ours is to make the output of a compensation professional more impactful in the organization
yeah,
and to increase the efficiency of delivering that impact. And for the vast majority of our customers, the people that create that output should probably not be, you know, a lot of organizations shouldn't afford to hire a full-time person with those skills.
yeah,
Much cheaper and much better to go to an expert outside.
Hey, so,
yeah,
knowing you're a technology guy at heart, Boyd, and that's how we started as we began our conversation, I definitely wanted to make sure we had a little chance to talk to you about the trends you see in technology. We know you've been, down a path of a technology software solution before and are at it again. And so, how are you seeing technology adapting to these kinds of trends? And, what gets you excited on the technology sphere?
Yeah, it's crazy that I've talked about compensation and alluded to software for the better part of 35 minutes or so, and haven't used the two letters
Yeah,
AI
I know you're
yet.
gonna now, though.
I was wondering.
Part of it is by design. It's funny. I've been a tech guy for a long time, and I've seen so many things that were delivered by the technology community before their time. And the countless examples of I can go back to the early '90s for Intel doing an MP3 player many years ahead of of the iPod. Right, it just didn't have any of the things around it to make it useful. Right, so I'm used to that, like being ahead of the curve. But AI is profound. You can't overstate it. It is going to have a profound impact. But I think there's been so much AI hype, and people are tired of it. They're jaded by it. And to me, AI is just a tool. It's like a few years ago we were talking about cloud and then big data, and now it's AI and specifically large language models, LLMs, or things like ChatGPT for those people who don't know that acronym. Um, all of them are just tools, and actually what matters in the end is, can you deliver software that provides real value and efficiency, or effectiveness of a given process. And AI, anybody that doesn't use AI to accomplish those goals is missing the opportunity, because the tool is
Mhm.
outstanding. But anybody who just wants to sprinkle AI in for the sake of using AI, I'm afraid we see a little too much of that.
Yeah.
I'll give you a very tangible example. AI wash, which has been around for a long time. Remember, I was doing in 2015, we were building AI applications for large enterprises at one of my previous companies, Cogentic. So I was an AI guy before I was a comp guy. Um, but a great example is this concept of job matching, which for people that aren't comp geeks is more complicated than you think. It just means that, okay, if I have a job, say I'm hiring for a digital marketing person, I could say I want to hire a mid-level digital marketing specialist. Okay, I know what that means for me. How do I know how to map that to a benchmark so that I know what talent I want, what's the real comparable, right? That's a very tedious process. You have to select your benchmark surveys that you want to go through, and then look at job titles, and then make sure that when you dig under the job titles, particularly as we said, moving to skills, are they really reflective of the right skills that I need? Um, AI is a great application for that. So that's what we built, a version of that where you can really dig in and use natural language processing, and find matches. And it actually requires machine learning. It's not just a text to text match, because you got to dig in a little bit more and understand what the text means. Um, but so that when we love artificial intelligence, our whole company's built on our AI, but we're downplaying it because it's not the AI that matters. It's the result that, what used to take you, if you had 100 jobs, it could take you the better part of a person week to match those jobs up to surveys. We can get that down to a couple of hours. It is not like AI is telling you the answer. It's just saying, these are the most likely matches, because you as the professional, and again, many cases going to be a consultant, but you as the professional knows what that job really is. Because, by the way, the job description that you wrote is probably not very good anyway. You know, but that's so. I believe AI is profound, and it's timely, because all these challenges that we faced, doing it the old way is not going to work. Um, and then the other thing relative to technology, I think, is, I don't think people realize how much software architecture has changed in the last 5 or 6 years. And the average layperson shouldn't worry about software architecture too much. But the best way I can give an analogy of what's changed is, anybody that used to do model airplanes. I used to build model airplanes when I was a kid. You get the kit and you build a model airplane, and that's the plane you had, right? If you wanted to change the plane, you're either going to hack it up with an Exacto, right? You're not going to get it. Anything other than that plane is not going to happen, as opposed to building something cool with Legos. You build something with Legos, and you don't like it, you can easily take the Legos apart. That's what's happened in software. It used to be anything written 10 years ago was way more like a model airplane. So you as a client say, well, I want this configured a little bit differently, massive effort to rebuild the plane. Whereas now everything is like Legos. So I think, as much as AI, I think that move to you might, the buzzwords are services oriented architecture, those kind of things. But forget, any of your audience should care less. But what they should care about is, when they're looking at software, is look for those that are,
Legos.
maybe a little bit more modular and modern, because that really provides a lot of advantage. And then you combine that with a very targeted. Don't just have any vendor that tells you they have AI in it. Ask them, what is the AI actually doing, and do you believe the algorithm? Do you believe, if all they're doing is you know doing an open AI or chat GPT call, that could be really valuable. Like, it's UI, but don't overestimate how cool it is. And if they're telling you they're predicting a result with AI, ask how.
Do,
So I
do
think
you do
that
you see any risks or concerns with AI specifically for comp? I mean, like with recruiting, right? It's biased. With engagement, it might be misreading someone's intentions. What about recruiting or comp? Do you see a threat or a concern anywhere there?
it again, I wouldn't say AI is the threat. I think
Yeah.
it's what are you going to ask AI to do?
Yeah.
Um, if you went to ChatGPT and said I want to hire a finance analyst, what should I
Mhm.
pay him? That is a horrible use of AI. Don't do that. You know, it would be,
Okay. Check.
the chances of that being a good outcome are
Yeah.
almost zero.
Yep.
So I wouldn't say there's just a broad category of, uh, there are people that would like to say, hey, could AI tell you, where this individual should get paid? And
Mhm.
I don't believe yet in the data integrity of what
Yeah.
you need to make that prediction without significant consequences. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but AI for doing something like sifting through large amount AI is really good at sifting through large amounts of data and trying to narrow
Yeah.
down the best likely options. Human beings, I think, should always make the final decision.
Yeah.
So
Totally. Emotional intelligence has to win.
yeah, I mean, HR, the
Has to
agency is
win.
never going to leave HR, right? This is not
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
turnkey business. But I just think I definitely agree that like HR practitioners, people on your listening to this podcast that are in HR and payroll, get a little level of familiarity. I wrote an article a couple of years ago about AI basics for HR people,
Yeah.
because knowing how things work, and not to know how to pick a random forest algorithm from
Yeah.
some other algorithm, but to just know the basics of it will give you a chance to ask the right questions.
Google has some great free training you can do out there. I'll try to find the link I used when I did it and put it out there for everyone. It's there's plenty of free resources to get some
And
training
you
with
have to
that.
find ones that are in lay person
Yeah.
speak, right? Because it can
Yes.
be intimidating.
Yes.
AI is very, very simply a prediction. That's all it is. It's just statistical prediction.
Yep.
And you
Software.
gotta stop. I mean, I think people leap immediately to the Space Odyssey, HAL taking over the world, and the idea of generalized artificial intelligence, which is the robots taking over the world scenario. I mean, smarter people than I am have said that's a real legitimate threat. It's just not even in the earliest stages of being. It's possible that it's not even not even feasible ever, right? What we're
Yeah.
looking at now is much more mundane. Computers churning a lot of information to make a statistical prediction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, most people, I don't know if they're not deep into it, don't realize that's all ChatGPT does is predict
Yeah.
the next most likely word to emerge from a string of words.
It's an
It just
algorithm.
does it at such massive scale that it seems like it's intelligent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
I'd say
exciting.
buyer beware, but definitely if somebody's not leveraging AI, they're not. It's like trying to build a house and say I'm going to go ahead and pass on the hammer.
Yeah.
I don't need that tool, right? That's kind of the level we're at. That
Yeah.
you need to figure out how to leverage it, but it's not a panacea. It's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
So Boyd, I want to ask you before we wrap up here, what kind of suggestions you might have for HR leaders as the world of transparency is upon us, right? And legislatively and by generation. And I have to say, I have a few notes and I'm sure you have far more wiser words than this, but I was like, well, see a doctor. I mean, use a specialist, ask about Legos, and don't ask the bot for your salary ranges.
Yes,
Besides those,
yeah,
for the really basic
yeah.
mind.
I think first of all, I think for the HR leaders out there, take compensation in this shift to transparency. Get ahead of it. Don't try to, if you're thinking about it from a compliance perspective, you're already a half step behind. You should think about this as an employee engagement, right? To me, the link is clear. Trust in your compensation leads to higher engagement. Higher engagement leads to higher productivity. Higher productivity leads to business results. Like I said, I come at this comp world and the whole HR world from being an executive in a large organization, and that's the way business leaders think. I got to drive a bottom line result. So number one, get ahead of it. Don't try to Don't try to get dragged along, or you're gonna be at a disadvantage. Number two, make sure you have the right access to expertise and tools. If you're holding your compensation salary ranges and spreadsheets and looking at them every 2 years and trying to do it yourself
Yeah.
with a part-time comp person, you're probably gonna be behind. So I definitely believe that for many organizations, if you can get to the point where you can hire a really, really expert compensation architect, that somebody who can really create and internalize, actually use salary data, survey data, and match jobs and do all those hard things, great. Hire them and make sure they're doing it great. For many other organizations, the right answer is going to be find a great consultant.
Yeah.
And then I think the third thing is to, from an HR leadership perspective, is to have a very clear comp philosophy and use it. I'm shocked at how many people have salary ranges, and the first thing their recruiters do when they go to hire is to go to the web and find like, you have to use it. So no, do I want to pay at 50% of the market? Do I want to pay at the 25th% of the market for these jobs and the 75th of the others? Like, have a strategy, and then when you have the strategy, apply it. Apply it when you communicate to your employees, when you hire your employees. Create a culture where your employees know that the best place to start in a new grade level is at the bottom quartile of the range, because that
Yeah.
gives them the most headroom,
Yeah.
right? If everybody thinks they got to be at the top of the range, you've done a bad job of explaining how it works, right? So that's my view: is get ahead of it, get the right expertise, and then use it. And in that right expertise, somewhere in there is a commercial for my software that I won't pitch. But
Yeah.
honestly, expertise and tools are similar, right? Excel is a wonderful tool. It's not necessarily good for consistent execution of a key business process like that. You ought to probably think about having some sort of system of record. And
Yeah.
there are several out there. I tend to like mine, but I think expertise and tools are that middle bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's fair, you know that we're pretty commercial free here, but I don't think we've even said since the very beginning opening, Boyd, that
Yeah.
you're CEO and co-founder of Payfederate, and so
Yes.
fair, fair for us to make sure that when you say mine
A very
is
cool
awesome,
product, by
it
the way.
is a very cool product. It's
I
definitely
have seen it.
Thank you.
sparked
Thank you.
me and my consulting firms interest and collaboration. And so there's just a lot of cool stuff going on there, and being built around the right tools is
Yeah.
something special.
Yeah, I think I can say without equivocation, because there are a handful of other companies doing similar things to us. Nobody's doing exactly what we do, but there's some good solutions out there. Um, to me, if somebody says, "Look, I need to have more people in that range from a dozen employees up to thousands," if more of those organizations said, "Yes, I think I ought to have a system of record that stores these ranges, where I update them, where I evaluate them relative to my employees, and I use them in hiring and recruiting," I can say without equivocation, find something. Ours
Yeah.
is one of a few versions, but the category is more important, so that you know I you didn't ask me this, but I think you put it in one of the notes early. Like,
Yeah,
why did you like this
that's right. Why do you
space?
stay?
I grew up as a poor kid, went to public school and a state school. It happened to be Purdue University, which is one of the best country schools in the country. But still, I was an Indiana kid. It's just my local state school. I had an opportunity to be very, very lucky and take advantage of the American dream. And the thing I think is our core mission is, how do we get everybody paid what they deserve? I I, I think of somebody who maybe grew up in tougher circumstances and went to community college at night and got their bachelor's degree, and all of a sudden they're going out for jobs, uh, and they're not getting the same kind of offers as somebody who graduates from a Purdue or a Duke or and they have the same skills, the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
ability, and that pains me. And I think that's the source of a lot of the the bad results we get for both women and underrepresented minorities, is where they came from. So, my passion is, how do we get people paid fairly? And you can't do that if you don't have a good process and the systems and tools and expertise to execute it. So it's yes, it's also about business results. I believe you'll get much better business results with that. But what drives me every day is to give that little poor kid growing up in Dundalk, Maryland, make sure that every kid has that shot, no matter what their path is, and that they get paid what they deserve. It shouldn't all be about luck or who you know or where you came from.
Awesome. Pete, you're on mute. Sorry. I guess I had to say that out loud.
That was
I didn't
weird.
mean to
Yeah,
do
I
that.
think muted myself. No, I love it, Boyd. I think that's great. It's no, it's a great point. I
Yeah,
mean,
that was my mic
I
drop
know.
moment.
He dropped
yeah,
his
not
mic and pushed the mute button all at once.
I'll have him edit that out. But no, but seriously, I love it. I think you're right. There's a lot of folks that, we don't all negotiate the best, right? Or the same. So there's this opportunity to make sure people are protected, and you do build that trust through that, right? I think, and that this can help
Yeah.
technology for
Yeah,
sure.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think we can maybe wrap up a little bit for today. I'd love to. I'm sure there's much more we could talk about. We might actually
Yeah.
fashion it into another one of these sometime in the future, Boyd. But what is coming up for you? Where are you going to be? Where can folks reach you? And I'll make sure that we get the right information to Pete so he can actually publish it with our show description.
Yeah.
Where to connect with you. What are you up to coming up here in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah. So we're plugging away, growing our business and serving our customers. We'd like more of them, so that's the briefest commercial I'll give. Reach out to me. Boyd at payfederate.ai is the email address. I think you can put my LinkedIn profile on the site where this is Boyd Davis one. I think
Yeah,
it's
you are
odd
number
that I
one.
couldn't get Boyd
Yeah,
Davis.
you're
Yeah,
number
because
one. I saw.
there's not too many, but I couldn't get just Boyd Davis. And visit us at payfederate.ai if you want to learn more about our solution. And again, check out others. Look at modern compensation management software. Google something like that. I'm sure you'll find. I'm a big believer in the category, but I won't necessarily share the specific names of people I think you should look at. Look at us first. But yeah, we're not at HR Tech. For those of you going to that, we chose to not go to that show next year. I think the next time audiences can stop by and visit us is in World at
Will it
Work,
work? Yeah.
which I think is in Orlando,
Cool.
Florida next
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
So
Exciting.
come see us in Orlando in the spring. Maybe we'll be some other event, but in the meantime, we're always available 24/7 at
Hey,
Payfederate.
by the way, if you have that link
Yeah.
to the article that you mentioned, it's not what you called it, but I kind of, in my mind, it was AI for dummies, right? Something that you wrote, AI for HR. It wasn't for dummies. It's for HR.
Yes.
If
I
that's still
believe I wrote it for I believe I wrote it for World at Work.
okay.
So it is behind a paywall at World at Work. Happy to share
Okay.
that link for
Great.
those people. But if somebody also wants it, they can just drop me an email, and I own the rights to it too, so I can share it with
Cool.
whoever I want.
Yeah.
But
That's awesome.
I'll definitely, if we want, I can dig up that link and we'll put it in the show notes
That's
as well.
awesome.
That'd be great. If you could find that, shoot it over. I'll get it in. We'd love to share.
Okay. Awesome,
cool.
Pete. Where are you going to be coming up next?
Oh, by the time this comes out, we'll be on the road in the thick of the fall tech event trails. So yeah, look for us out there. I think HR Tech will probably be the week that we launch this. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, hope to see
That's gonna
everybody
be a
there
crazy week.
or at some event somewhere.
Okay, awesome. Well, I know I'll see you there. And
Yes.
thank you so much, Boyd, for joining us. We appreciate you and all of the things you had to share with us today.
Yes. Thank you so much,
that
Boyd.
was a lot of fun. Happy to do this anytime with you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our guests did. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right. We'll talk to everybody next time. Take care.